Every new day holds a promise.
Hey, this is Matt from GamesRadar, and I'm here with Sam Roberts from PC Gamer, and today we're going to talk about Mirror's Edge Catalyst. Now, Sam, you've played it quite recently. Obviously, the biggest question is how the open world sort of changes the game, and what do you think of it?
Yeah, so the open world basically transforms Mirror's Edge into kind of like a playground relative to the more tunnel-shaped linear levels from the first game. And so DICE has had to design it in a completely different way. It doesn't feel like an open world in the sort of Grand Theft Auto sense. Like, it feels like you're in this sort of big hub. And looking at the map, it seems like it's a bunch of like interconnected hubs, and that's how the open world stuff works. We were just looking at like one part of the game, which felt like it could be like a quarter or a fifth of the overall map size. And it looks very familiarly kind of like City of Glass-esque, like the early settings from the first game. And it works really well. It gives the game a different pace for sure, because you have like markers on the map saying, go here, do this mission, or do this kind of like running challenge and things like that. So it definitely feels different on that level for sure.
Cool. So, I mean, in terms of how it actually plays then, because I read your preview, and there's a couple of things there mechanically that have changed slightly in terms of how you sort of traverse the world and how you have to sort of build up certain skills and things like that. Does it feel like vastly different in that respect, or is it still kind of as hard as it used to be?
It's yes and no. Like, it's the same Mirror's Edge that it used to be, but like with the upgrade trees they've added this time around, which give you upgrades for your platforming or Faith's moveset rather, combat, and then like some of the other tools that you get later in the game which weren't in the closed beta. You can unlock some of the abilities you already had in the first Mirror's Edge.
Okay.
So like there's three examples of this I picked up on. There's like when you fell quite far in Mirror's Edge the first game, you could roll at the last second, and you could keep momentum going from doing that. And timing it right was really satisfying. That's something you have to unlock this time, as is doing like a 180 turn by hitting the bumper, which was in the first game too. That's something you have to unlock, which is weird, because if you come into it knowing Mirror's Edge really well, you're like, why can't I do this? And then you kind of figure it out. And at first I thought, maybe they simplified it too much, but they're doing those as upgrades, so the players have to kind of learn them as they go. So it's a little less daunting to have to do everything at once like in the first game. I think that's a concession to newer players. And the last ability from the first game you had that you have to unlock this time is that Faith will lift her legs, like if you hop over like a small obstacle, and that will kind of help her keep momentum. It shaves like milliseconds off your time as you're going, but it feels really good. And so these things you could do in the first game, but now you have to unlock. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And it only took me about an hour or so to unlock all those moves anyway.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And it certainly feels like it's retained that the sort of sense of actually having to physically do something to get around the world, rather than quite a few games that have traversal, and it's sort of you hold one button and it does everything for you. So it's retained that sense of difficulty of just sort of having to actually think about what you're doing, presumably.
Yeah, and I very cruelly pick on Assassin's Creed when I talk about this, but Assassin's Creed did make platforming into a thing where you had to just hold down the trigger, and that was it. You didn't even have to jump anymore. And like there's been an infinite amount of those games, and there's just been one Mirror's Edge, and I don't think that's fair, because I love how kind of intricate the platforming was in the first game. And yeah, they've retained that in its entirety. And being in an open world, I think, means it's less daunting to just like pick that up and learn it again, because there's no great rush for you to go and do stuff, because you can just take your time and learn how to interact with the environment. And yeah, so I think they've kind of identified that as something that worked about the first game, and they just needed to find a different way to present it to people.
That's cool. I mean, it certainly sounds like the platforming, which was definitely the best thing about the first game, has retained all the same stuff. How does something like the combat, which perhaps wasn't so good, hold up?
Yeah, it's very different actually. When I played it at E3, I thought it was a little bit too easy, because I did this challenge where Faith would just run through like an environment knocking people down. I don't know if you played the same one, but
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, it might have been at Gamescom too. But basically, I thought that was what the combat was now, but that's actually only like one half of the combat. So if you're running at full speed, and there's like a bar on the HUD that will tell you if you're running at full speed, you can just knock enemies down straight away. But if you're in a like kind of close quarters environment with enemies, which you will be like every now and then, there's an entirely different moveset. So an enemy can kind of lunge at you, and you can kind of like pull back. It's like a kind of dodge move. And it's like playing a kind of first-person beat-em-up, cool. which is a bit different. And you can kick enemies sort of left or right, and kind of like change their positioning. So it's a little bit kind of strategic on that level. You can make enemies fall into each other; they'll sort of like flop over against each other. But better still is when you boot someone off the side of a building, and it's like, wow, I'm just like, that guy's dead, but I'm definitely a superhero now. But that's really, really cool. It's sort of like, it just feels like there's a bit more to it than there was in the last game, where you could just sort of slide and kick all enemies or disarm them and shoot them. There are no guns this time, so they've just worked on building a better melee system, and I think it holds up.
It sounds great. Anything that lets me kick people off roofs, I'm 100% in.
Yeah.
One of the other things you mentioned in the preview, which sounds really, really cool, is the social challenges stuff. So being able to set up your own challenge, which you can then share with friends. How exactly does that work? And what did you actually do when you were setting it up?
Well, you basically press a button on, I think it's right on the D-pad, and you can just set up a challenge there. So there's two different types of challenges. One's called like a BE emitter challenge, which is, the idea is that you get to a really high point on like a building, you drop it, and then you kind of challenge friends to find it, which you can do via a companion app, which I assume will be out when the game is. But the better one to me is the time trials that you can create, where you can drop a kind of starting point in the world, as long as it's not too close to another challenge starting point like nearby, and then you can from there just set the points wherever you want, and then end the time trial wherever you want. So yeah, it's actually really, even if you build like a bad time trial, it's still somehow good, because the competitive element means that every single one you create will have its own leaderboard, so you can just see how other people compare. And yeah, no matter how bad it is, there's a kind of like a gamified aspect to it, and that it's really, really cool for speedrunners and people who just want to play Mirror's Edge forever. Like there's potentially infinite game in doing that, I think. So yeah, really exciting.
It does sound amazing. It's like the Mario Maker of...
Yeah, it's so good that I keep questioning whether it's real or not, and that I imagined it, because it's sort of like the sort of Need for Speed-esque kind of dynamic open world challenge that I sort of dream they put in the game. So I'm fairly sure I didn't imagine it, and it's a thing that's actually going to happen. So that's quite exciting.
One last point, that maybe you didn't get to see you didn't get a full view of what it was like, but are you getting any kind of sense of what the story's like compared to the first one?
Yeah. I mean, whenever the cutscene started, I just wanted to check my emails. Like, they've made a good effort to make them look fancy. Like they're very shiny cutscenes that were amazing looking character models, better voice acting than the first game, which was just so dry. The first game's cutscenes, which were like animated and like ran in the loading screens, and I think everyone hated them pretty much. And they've done their best to address that here, but I don't know. There's something about Mirror's Edge to me that's so that art direction does so much of the world building for you that if you try and layer it like a slightly generic dystopian storyline on top with factions and like evil characters, you only chip away at that rather than adding to it, and that feels really harsh, because they've definitely tried their hardest, but it's just not. I'm not feeling it. I don't play Mirror's Edge for story, but thankfully there's so much else to the game that I really don't mind, even if I don't get it.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like all the best bits of it are still there and better than ever. So
yeah, absolutely.
That sounds really cool. Sam, thank you very much. And if you haven't already, please head to the website and check out the preview. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe. Thanks very much.